So thank you very much for having me. I wanted to talk to you about dreams today. So I want to know who is a dreamer here in this room. Okay, we got a lot of dreamers. So I want to introduce you to some dreamers that I know. And these dreamers are students at the University of California, Irvine. And the difference between the dreamers, their dreams, and yours is something that you can't see. And the students that go to the school, which is again the University of California, Irvine. And I don't know if you know about universities in the States, but it's one of the 11 UC schools, which is very difficult to get into. So you have to have a very good GPA, you have to have letters of recommendation, have to do very well in high school to be able to attend a UC system school. So these students are very smart, like you, and they have dreams, just like you, for transformation, for positive things to happen in the world for them. But the one thing that they don't have is status. And I'll talk about what that means. They're undocumented. And by that I mean they're not considered citizens and they're not considered permanent residents. Some of them are lucky enough to have some protection that I'll talk about in a minute. But the interesting thing about these young people is that they are, like many immigrants, incredibly hardworking. They're almost the exception. They have worked so hard to get to this place that once they get there, they build communities that are really strong and that go out and benefit the rest of us that are at the university. So I have another question for you, and I wanted to ask you if any of you are documented. No? Nobody's documented? Good, okay. That means that we don't have anybody out of status from the United States here, so it's a good thing that you're not documented. So what DACA is the deferment of Deferment Action for Childhood Arrivals, is one of Obama's legislative pieces that came out in 2012 that allowed people out of status, particularly young people, that there were several requirements for this DACA status. And there were a lot of young people, like the one that I just introduced you to, that were able to get benefits from this nebulous, it's not really a status, it's just a protection from deportation. So what that allowed them to do was to be able to get a social security number, which allows them to work. It allowed them, therefore, after the social security number, to get driver's license. And the driver's license, of course, allowed them to actually get a vehicle or get a checking account and all those things that we might take for granted, because if you don't have those essential papers, then you can't really function at least in the States. So even in the university environment, they would not be allowed to receive grants, so they would have to pay out of pocket. But in California specifically, there have been a lot of progressive policies that have given these dreamers the benefit of receiving, for example, aid. So that is what documented means. And the thing about being documented is that, as I was explaining before, these are a very special group of elite students that were the ones that were able to actually make it. What happens is that there are a lot of young people that are not able to get DACA for whatever reason, because they were maybe over 30 years old, or at the time it hit, it was 2012, so it would depend on where you were in that cycle and given those rules. So what happens though if you're in a family where you're able to get DACA, but your sister is not? And your parents are undocumented, but you have siblings that are American citizens. A mixed status family is very common in the States. And it creates a lot of anxiety for young people because you see people around you that don't have both full benefits as full citizens, and they are constantly in fear, or they're not able to negotiate the system as well as they can because of these roadblocks that they have. And you know, because the rhetoric during this election has been so anti-immigrant, you can only imagine what this means for immigrant communities, because it doesn't matter if you're documented or if you're not. If you are an immigrant, you're immediately pulled into this notion of the other. And it's not anything new. It's just that, you know, you just lived it in your election, and thank you for voting differently than we do, because you're now the leaders of the free world. You know, somebody has to be, so I'm glad it's you know, it's you. And but again, what happens in terms of identity is that there's not only just one identity, right? You can be an undocumented, but you can be female, or you can be gay, or you can be straight, or you can be transgender. I mean, there's a multiplicity of yourself that you have to negotiate. And in California in particular, and I think in the States in general, there's this particular attack against Mexicans, because we're right next to the States, obviously, and the largest immigrant group. And I think that does something to how we think about brown bodies. And it's really important in bodies of color in general, because we immediately think about the other in terms of color, not just, and that's what I was getting back to in terms of whether you have status or not, does it make a difference? I mean, am I afraid to go back to the United States on the way back? Yeah, because I know somebody's gonna look at my passport twice. I have a Mexican passport. I've been in the States for 20 years. I'm married to an American citizen, but I'm still a permanent resident. So these things are real. You know, the real implications of the rhetoric are hitting us right now in ways that we just couldn't imagine. And it's not just, you know, I'm older now, and I've lived with aggression and microaggression all my life, having grown up in California as an immigrant myself, and I'm better equipped to deal with it. But I just feel for the young people and the stories that I hear. When the election happened, I heard from school teachers that young kids were just crying with their teachers after the election. I mean, this thing is just affecting our communities in ways that I just never imagined, because it wasn't like this wasn't happening under Obama. It was. He deported the largest number of immigrants out of the States, more than any other president before him. But the difference now is tone. And I think that that's just something important to keep in mind, just generally for everybody, because tone does matter. And as you engage in your practice as artists, it's just so important to think about yourself and your place in the world and your attitudes and your beliefs, because there's always this opportunity to challenge yourself in ways that are important. And I don't mean this to just like push you into the white guilt thing, because it's not that, but we all have our privileges. And every time that I work with these kids, I have to keep mine in check, because I don't know what their lives are like. I can tell you about them, you know, from what they've told me. But I was very lucky. I grew up with a very humble background, with poor parents that were teachers in Mexico, but believed in the power of education. And I learned, and my mom was an English teacher, so I started learning English when I was 4. By the time my parents divorced and I was 10, I already knew English. So when my mom remarried an American and we moved to the States, I was able to get a green card. A lot of people don't have that good fortune. You know, a lot of young people don't have that choice. They're taken by parents, and that's just what happens, whether, you know, it'd be a situation where there's refugee crisis and the kids are taken, or people have to leave because of, you know, things that they also can't control. this situation about the lack of control we may have in our lives sometimes is just, I think we all have to have compassion for that. But we do all, I think, at least we keep it in check. At least I want to keep it in check because it's just so easy to fall back into that other position, it really is. And I find myself struggling sometimes to understand why the kids that, that I'm helping don't do this or they don't do that. And then I think about it, or I talk to them about them some more, and then I begin to understand the challenges that I just can't even begin to see. So, anyways, that's just, I think, a recommendation because, so one of the interesting things about the Dreamer movement, which is a thing, the Dreamers initially in 2012, what happened was really interesting. They began to have kind of this underground movement online, and some activists call it as a precursor to the Black Lives Matter, because they were really able to harness kind of this energy and this kind of activism to push for this legislation. And initially the legislation was to give them full citizenship, but it just, because we had a Republican Senate at the time, it didn't happen. But again, they have so many strengths, people that are vulnerable, that it's also, one doesn't have to get into a patronizing role, which can happen, I think, with people. You want to be helpful, but at the same time, it's like they can help themselves too. And it's important that they do, because that brings them agency. And it's, for example, what I do for them is I support them with digital assets. So we created, their website was really terrible, so we created a new website, a new identity, taking into consideration that at that time they wanted to come out. And one of the reasons I have Aureliano up here is because Aureliano is gay and is undocumented, and he does these incredible drag shows, right? But there's, in the website and in the web presence, it's just important it was important for us to learn how to negotiate these identities online. And they had to make decisions as to whether they weren't gonna come out and have their images displayed in the website or not. And they wanted to come out because and they wanted to have their images online because it was a form of empowerment for them. It was a form of just standing up for themselves. But as soon as the election happened, I got a call and I had to scrub that website of all the images. I mean, the images are probably out there in the world. Somebody must have downloaded or something like that. But there's still that, there's still this issue of how you negotiate identity and how you negotiate yourself now in this moment that is just so incredibly critical and so unknown, because we just don't really know if they're going to be deported. And it's really scary. I mean, the protection should be there, that the government shouldn't take their information and deport them, but the fact is that they have it, and they could. So that's, we're waiting and seeing what will be done about this, because the raids have begun, and they get announced like a spectacle. And INS agents have been given kind of carte blanche to do whatever they want in ways they haven't before. And it's chilling for the rest of us because, as I said initially, it doesn't matter if you have citizenship or not. There's always the presumption, if you're a person of color, that you are legal, undocumented. And there's always that language of illegality of bodies, which I find really fascinating, because being undocumented is a civil offense, is not a criminal offense in the United States, but it gets framed as such. So, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, to think about protest and how important that has become for these people and for just Americans of all ages. It's been an incredible thing to behold. it feels like a new civil rights for us. It feels urgent. It feels necessary. And young people and old people, everybody, we're all having to gather and to think about how this happened to us. So, the power of art. I worked in a museum of art and design for almost 10 years. And I have to say, art just changed my life. And I know it sounds like super corny, but it does. Art changes, it like gives you a third lung. It gives you a different way of seeing the world. And sometimes I think that art can be very instrumental, and it's really important. And in this case, for example, the posters that Shepard Fairey and his collective made have been really important, both in terms of bringing a different visual language to the others we're afraid of, or that we judge, or that we don't understand. But there is a danger in that, because art is more than being instrumental. Art is more than a Shepard Fairey poster, or I don't know if you saw those posters from another guerrilla collective that put that quote from Donald Trump where he was talking about grabbing women. It was plastered all over New York, and it's there's these ways of just recycling these words or these images to confront these problems in ways that are very public. So again, it's powerful, but at the same time, the practice of art is more than just that. So in your practice, it's important to reflect on that. How is your identity and your craft aligning or not aligning to moments in history or to impacts that you want to make? So those are questions that you're going to have to kind of grapple with as you're going through your own elections, as you're thinking about how life could have been different if your election had turned out another way. I mean, we couldn't believe ours. I'm sure the Brexit people are still like, we have a colleague who still can't believe it, who had a fallout with his family and is now speaking to them, but it's nobody's immune from it. And I think also that the power of art can be in holding us all accountable about the complexity of identity, of so many things, of the human condition just very generally, whether it be design, whether it be music, fashion, art, whatever it is, there is that thread of importance that you need to think about. Because, for example, for us, funding the arts, it's happening. And again, these things are real, but if we have communities like you that keep this alive, and for example, one of the things that we're doing with Nishant is we're helping develop a course that is free and online with World Press Foundation, because we have to find ways to help people tell their stories. And so in your practice too, I would end by asking you to think about how your practice can be augmented by thinking about these really kind of challenging ways in which you have to think about yourself as an artist and how you're going to contribute, because I do believe there is a power of transformation in art, and you know it too, because otherwise you wouldn't be in art if you didn't believe that. So how are you going to do that? That's, I guess, my question to you.
Thank you so much, Claudia.